Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam wa ala Rasulillah. I was going over a book. We're going over a book of the many books I constantly go over. I was going over this particular book by Dr. Amos Wilson, right? The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat. And in particularly, I was going back over the issue of education and his views with regards to the relationship between education and power. It's Dr. Amos Wilson. And one of the points that he brings in his book is the difference in the gathering of education, or the gathering of knowledge, right? The gathering of knowledge as it relates to the African American and the non-white or the European American, right? So one of the points he says, I'm going to start off with education and power. He says, under white supremacy, the black man, in being educated, must be educated in ignorance. His education, to a good degree, must lay foundations for his stupidity. Because if you're educated out of relationship to yourself, in terms of things that are irrelevant to yourself, to your own survival, and your own advancement as a people, then you're being miseducated. And in a sense, educated in ignorance. This is his view. He says education is not a mere accumulation of knowledge. Knowledge has to serve a function in terms of advancing the interests of a people and in securing their survival in the world. We've indicated that our education has to be measured in those terms. The fact that we continue to let the European continue to name things, to define things, to determine what is important, to talk about, to be in control of conditioning, to be in control of information, to maintain the capacity to discriminate, to maintain the capacity to create desires. The fact that we let this situation continue means that we will continue to be created by the Europeans, and we will then be induced into self-hatred and self-alienation. And this is his view with regards to education and allowing the European to control the narrative. And he brought a good point with regards to people of color allowing the European to constantly define things and to name things, right? You'll find this in many works in dealing with white supremacy, with regards to the fact that the white supremacists get to name and define terms. This is very crucial, and this is one of the reasons why the LGBTQ community, for the most part, has made the strides that they've made, because they had the ability to define and redefine. For example, there's civil rights. Well, the LGBTQ community come in and redefine civil rights to include them, right? And this is the point of education and accumulating knowledge. That knowledge has to be utilized for what? Self-preservation and advancement. If it's not for that, then your education is a waste of time. There's no benefit in your education. This is the point that Dr. Amos Wilson brings out. And we find this same concept even in Islam with regards to gathering knowledge, right? We know knowledge is obligatory. One of the things that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Allah about was knowledge. Qul Rabbi zidni ilma, right? Oh my Lord, increase me in knowledge. And majority of the scholars, when they talk about knowledge, we know they're saying al-ilmu nafi, right? Beneficial knowledge, meaning the deen. But there are some scholars who also say that this also includes the knowledge of the dunya, right? The various fields, right? The Muslims should strive and excel in the various fields just like they strive and excel in the deen. So there has to be a balance. And we find ample examples with the ulama of the past, right? Who had knowledge of not only the deen, but they had knowledge of the dunya, right? Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah had knowledge of medicine in conjunction with a knowledge of the deen. Many of the ulama were historians, right? In addition to being muhaddithun as well as fuqaha. Many scholars were like this. A recent scholar, rahimahullah, Sheikh Muhammad Taqiyuddin al-Hilali, one of the translators of the Noble Quran, many of his degrees are in the secular field. I think he had his PhD from Berlin in journalism, right? So this shows that we can have knowledge in those things as well as knowledge in the deen. The problem when it comes to the Muslims in general, and African Americans in particular, and the Hispanic Muslims in particular, is that for the most part, they don't use the knowledge of the deen and their expertise, the knowledge of the dunya, to better their people. We understand bettering the Muslim ummah as a whole, no problem with that. But at the same time, there's an abandonment in getting knowledge to benefit the people as a whole, or your people particularly or specifically. This is one of the main problems. This is the point that Dr. Amos Wilson brings. The knowledge have to serve a purpose, and that purpose should be to preserve a people in addition to moving those people forward. This is a reality. This is what the goal of education should be, and the goal of accumulating knowledge should be. In Islam, there's no difference. In Islam, there's no difference. There's a correlation here. We seek knowledge. We ask Allah to grant us knowledge, right? Quote, Rabbi zidni ilma, right? The dua that Rasulullah alayhi salatu salam was the only thing he was told to ask for, right? Asking Allah to increase us in knowledge, right? And then once we get the knowledge, then what? You have to implement it. You have to implement the knowledge. You have to make the knowledge practical. Why? So that people around you can see the implementation of the knowledge. The people have to see it, right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he get the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gets the Quran, right? And then he, what? Exemplifies that Quran through his sunnah, right? So the Sahaba, they do what? They see what the Prophet do. They see what the Prophet does, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then they ask questions with regards to what he's doing. And then they begin to what? Apply it. And when there's an issue with application, meaning an issue arises where they don't have the knowledge to apply in a certain situation, then you find them going back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And it's the same thing with the Muslims today, right? When we come across an area in society that we don't know, then we take it back to the scholars, right? Take it back to the scholars. You know, so this is the reality of how we should do with regards to gathering knowledge. right? That knowledge should be for the betterment of yourself as an individual. Then it should also extend to the society, meaning the overall society, and then the particular group of people you yourself come from. The group of people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you to be from amongst, right? Whether it be Arab, whether it be African American, whether it be Puerto Ricans, whether whatever, on and on and on and on for the different ethnic groups throughout the earth, right? So this is a reality. So we can see the correlation now between what Dr. Amos Wilson is saying and how it coincides with Islamic principles, right? With regards to seeking knowledge. And you have to put the knowledge into practice. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, right? Except those who believe in what? وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, do righteous actions, Surah Al-Asr, right? Here we have belief, and then we have what? Righteous actions. The same thing. Let me read what Dr. Amos Wilson said again. Let me read it again to show you something. He says, under white supremacy, the black man, in being educated, must be educated in ignorance. Now check this out. His education, to a good degree, must lay foundations for his stupidity. Because if you're educated out of relationship to yourself, in terms of things that are irrelevant to yourself or to your own survival and your own advancement as a people, then you're being miseducated. And in a sense, educated in ignorance. This is a reality. This is a reality. So, and he's going to get into us going to these universities. But before we get into that, if you're African American or if you're a non-white and you attend universities or community colleges or colleges, right? There's a certain mentality that you should try to have when you are getting knowledge, right? When you're getting educated to ascertain knowledge, right? One of the things he points out in this book, right? Let me show this book again, right? The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat, right? One of the things he points out in this book is that, and I mentioned it earlier, is when Europeans go to the universities, right? And African Americans go to the same university, right? They could be in the same class. There's a psychological difference with regards to why they're there. For most African Americans that go to these universities, we go so that we can be employed, right? We want a good job. It's one of the main reasons why we go to these universities, so we can have good jobs and work in the system. Now, the European American, from Dr. Amos Wilson's view, is they go to maintain the system. They come to maintain dominance. Two different psychologies, but they're getting the same information, right? They're getting the same information. Now, for example, and he talks about a lot in this book, conditioning, right? Conditioning, you know, Pavlov, right? The salivating dog, right? We start getting into conditioning. Now, we'll read this and, you know, we'll go over this in Psychology 101 and we're like, okay, conditioning. Okay, he had a dog and, you know, there was a response, you know, showed the meat, the dog salivated. Later on, he added the sound of a bell and the dog hit a bell. The dog begins to salivate like this, right? And we don't go no further than that. We need the class to pass to get that credit, another notch in the many notches that we have to accumulate to get our degree, right? However, for many of the white students, it's different. The thinking is different. And that is, they take what Pavlov is doing seriously. Why? Because they're going to utilize Pavlov's theory to maintain this dominance. Or they're going to utilize B.F. Skinner's theory to maintain this dominance. Excuse me one moment. I had okay, sorry. Little interruption. So anyway, so they're learning these theories in psychology and sociology to do what? To maintain dominance. Same thing with regards to sociology. When women started getting into the field of sociology, right? We can argue and say, okay, they've acquired the education to do what? To benefit women, right? They utilize it to benefit women. But within that group, you had those who were from the what? LGBTQ community. And their theories started gaining weight. So much so that you had the debate between what? Biological determinism, right? And those who said, look, just because you were born with genitalia doesn't mean that you can be a man or a woman. That doesn't determine anything, right? The point that I'm making is not getting into that debate. Although we as Muslims, we don't roll with that. The point that I'm making is that they utilize the education, right? They utilize the education to gain power, right? To get their theories out, to push their theories, right? And now guess what? They're defining things. They're naming things. See, when you don't name things or you don't define things, then you really don't have a voice, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of pushback with regards to CRT, right? Critical race theory, right? Because African Americans are what? Defining, they're naming, such as intersectionality, right? Convergence, right? You hear these terminologies used throughout the society. What many people don't know and understand is that the majority of the pushback is because they don't want African Americans having the ability to name and define things. And this is where we can respect Dr. Bell, right? Dr. Derek Bell, one of the founders of CRT, because he jumped in and he started defining things. And he was critical of everything, right? So, same with social dominance theory. I always forget the names of those two who started social dominance theory. It's not a lot. They're both psychologists. One's African American, one's European American female. But you can look it up, social dominance theory. You'll find both. You'll see the images of both of them in that. But at any rate, the point is, this is one of the goals behind education. And that is to gain power. To do what? To name and define. So I'm going to reread what he said. He says, education is not a mere accumulation of knowledge. Knowledge has to serve a function in terms of advancing the interests of a people and in securing their survival in the world. Now check this part out. I'm going to read this part. He says, the fact that we continue to let Europeans continue to name things, to define things, to determine what is important to talk about, to be in control of conditioning, to be in control of information, to maintain the capacity to discriminate, to maintain the capacity to create desires. The fact that we let this situation continue means that we will continue to be created by the Europeans. And we will then be induced into self-hatred, and self-alienation. And this is another reason why you want to get educated and formulate your own definitions and formulate your own language so that no one can come in and tell you who you are and what's important to you. And this is what's happened throughout our educational system, right? For example, when you look at American history is replete of Aboriginal people, dark-skinned people, playing a role in the founding of the Americas. It's replete. It's replete. We can go on and on. But that's not the point in just bringing that up. I'm not just bringing that up for a point. Because many of us, we do our own research. We self-reach. We get the information. Not a problem. Many books out, many essays out, many articles, many databases out there on it. Right? It's not the point. My issue is it's not being taught in the schools. Give you a classic example of what I'm talking about. When we talk about the founding of America, right? The United States of America, that is. We talk about 1776, right? Which is the founding of the United States of America. Yeah, I understand the 1619 Project. You know, for those who've read that. Their argument was not that the United States of America was started in 1619. They were saying the birth of it started in 1619 with regards to what? Slavery, right? And capitalism, because they go hand in hand, right? That's one of the points that they brought up. At any rate, when we look at the spies of George Washington, right? We look at the spies of George Washington. One of the spies you don't hardly hear anything about. Go by the name of James Armistead Lafayette. He named himself after the French, I think a French captain by the name of James Lafayette, right? And for those of you who don't know American history, you know, the French basically helped the colonies get their independence by utilizing the French Navy, right, to keep the British at bay, right, to keep the British from coming on land while they were being dealt with, while the British were being dealt with on land, kept reinforcements from coming in. So anyway, this James Lafayette from the French, he played a role in that. But James Armistead Lafayette admired the man, so he took his name with the exception of the Armistead in the middle part. But anyway, James Armistead Lafayette, he was actually caught behind enemy lines. So he was with Benedict Arnold. And so when he was caught, they was like, you know, we got him. He was like, listen, I don't got no love for Washington and none of them. They had me as slaves. So I'm willing to join you guys. Which, okay, it makes sense because you had the black loyalists who joined the British, right? People like Colonel Ty of the black loyalists, who really the war would have been over a long time ago. And that's another time we start getting into the African Americans who joined the British during the Revolutionary War. But anyway, James Armistead Lafayette was a double spy. He would give Benedict Arnold bad information. He would give George Washington good information, right? To the point that the last few battles were decided based off the information that James Armistead Lafayette gave. What's my point in mentioning this particular aspect of history, this particular story? The reason why I'm mentioning it is when we were in school, if we would have been taught about this individual, right? And all the other individuals that played a role in the growth and the development and the starting or the founding of the United States of America, right? What would that have done psychologically? What would it have done psychologically for the African American? Going to school, hearing about someone who's from their people, hearing about someone who was from them, right? Who played a decisive role in the creation of this country. What that would have done psychologically. But the white supremacists, they knew. So keep them out. Keep them out. You can go on YouTube. Glenn Beck did a whole series on the black founders. It's still on YouTube. You can find it. Glenn Beck, out of all people. But yeah, he did a show like that. But anyway, he brought them up also. But at any rate, this is an issue with regards to education. Knowing the importance of where you are in that history. And when you learn things that has nothing to do with you, this is one of the things that Dr. Wilson points out. You learning things that have nothing to do with you. Things that are irrelevant to you. Things you had no impact or you thought you had no impact, you lose interest, right? Which is another issue that they banked on. So likewise, and the same thing when it comes to the Muslims, the Muslims in America, you need to learn about the Muslims who were already here in America. That needs to be in the history books. Not one sentence, not one paragraph, right? People need to know that the Muslims were brought over here as slaves. There were Muslims who came over here before slavery. All of that needs to know. They came with the French. They came with the Spanish, right? The libertos, like this. The point I'm making in all of saying all of this is that when you see yourself, right? When you see yourself, then you can identify, right? Personal note for me, Haneef. When I studied the Tuscarora Wars in North Carolina, it resonates with me. Why? Because my people mix with the Tuscarora, right? So I see it. I see my people. I see myself when I study the Tuscarora Wars. When the Tuscarora from New York come, because they have a reservation in New York. So when they come to North Carolina, some of the land that they come and look at is land that my family owned. Yeah, land that my family owned. That was Tuscarora land. And I got to let them know we still here. Because why? The Tuscarora were what they call triracial. Right? They were triracial. So knowing that aspect about my family history, the plantation we were on, the Indians and the Africans, right? Because I'm combination, right? Owning the land. It resonates with me anytime I study about the Tuscarora or the Africans in North Carolina, especially the Tuscarora Wars, right? Professor Smallwood, who does a lot of research on the Tuscarora, it's a big deal to me. Why? Because he's the same. Has Tuscarora blood flowing through his veins. And he's also African, right? It's a big deal. Why? Because you see yourself in the history. You can identify your people were part of that history, right? So it's the same thing. So moving on. All right, he says, he goes into the college and the university system, right? He says the European college is a part of European self-defense. Now check this out. Now we're going a different route. Check out how he goes with this. The European college is a part of European self-defense. All right. Now we're going to read on. You're going to get an understanding of what he means by this. It's not just there for creating jobs. If the white man wants to develop a weapon, check this out. If the white man wants to develop a weapon, he goes to Caltech, MIT, Princeton, or one of the other universities and says, I want this weapon developed. Then the professor sits down and develops that weapon. If there are diseases within the nation, he goes to the biology department, the medical school, and says, I want you to do research on this particular disease so that the people can be cured. And this the government going to who? The universities. Or in our case, in this day and time, because Dr. Wilson wrote this book in the 90s, which still holds relevance. Or now in this day and time, as opposed to back then, more universities are connected with hospitals. More universities are connected with hospitals. So basically the hospital and the labs are built into the universities, right? This is why when you go to see the doctor or you're in the emergency room, not only are you being seen by doctors, but you're being seen by what? Students, right? It's a lot of points he makes with regards to this. So he says, if he has a problem with farming, he goes to agricultural college and says, I want you to develop this strain of seed, develop this fertilizer, farming techniques, and product so that people can be fed, right? So the university is not just there for jobs and educating people in new fields, right? But it's also there to do research on behalf of what? Of who? The nation, right? On behalf of the nation. It does the research, right? When we look at black pathology, right? From back in the 60s, right? President Lyndon Johnson, right? His war on crime, right? War on poverty, his war on poverty, right? Who did he rely on? Who did President Lyndon Johnson rely on? He relied on a sociologist by the name of Daniel A. Moynihan. Now, I'm not going to get into his research because his research was more subjective as opposed to being objective, right? Like, for example, the single family household point that he made in that research, which was crazy because at that time, more African Americans were married compared to what we see now, which shows the bias, him being biased in his research. But nevertheless, the point of the university is to what? Benefit the society, right? That's the goal of it, right? And not just through producing new scientists, but also to develop things for the advancement and the preservation of that society. This is what education is for. This is what the colleges are for. And this is something we need to get in our heads as African Americans. Yes, we have HBCUs, right? Where do they get their money to do research? If they can even do research. Huh? They don't get it from us. We don't even say to the university, listen, we're going to give you this amount of money so you can research this and to examine the effects that this has on the African American community. We don't even do that. I'm here in North Carolina, and I'm here in Durham, North Carolina, and the HBCU that's here in Durham is North Carolina Central University, right? Next door to me is Raleigh, where you have St. Augustine and you have Shaw University. St. Augustine College, Shaw University. 45 minutes going the other way from me is a city called Greensboro. Greensboro has a African American female college called Bennett College. And it has North Carolina A&T. It's an agricultural and technical university, right? It's like in North Carolina, like the engineering program and the agricultural program ranks number one, depending on who you talk to. Some will say, North Carolina State, but others would say, no, North Carolina A&T, right? So we have those. These are the HBCUs in this area, right? And then, of course, Winston-Salem State, going back further. And there are others in North Carolina. I'm just saying as far as the triangle and the triad in my area, right? But North Carolina A&T had or it may still have, I'm not sure if it still exists, a contract with NASA. Yeah, NASA. Go figure. Right? HBCU with a contract with NASA. Alhamdulillah, it's a good thing. But how does that advance African Americans? Right? What role are African Americans going to be played if any policies were to develop as a result of the grant that you have for NASA and the research you're doing with NASA? These are questions that have to be asked. You know, these are questions that has to be asked. But this is the goal of the universities, to benefit the society. But it should also benefit you as a person or individual and your people, right? Your people should be part of the society and they should benefit just like everybody else in the society. If this is the case, then alhamdulillah. However, if that's not the case, then hey, then you're being miseducated. All right. So moving on. He says the college, university, and educational system is not merely a jobs factory. It's a major part of a people's survival mechanism, right? That's what the educational system, the college, university, that's what it's for. It's not just for a job. It's for the people's survival mechanism, right? Now peep it. He says that is why you have to have them for yourself. This is why you have to have them for yourself. Talking about these educational institutions, right? And this goes with the Muslims too, right? I just talked about the HBCUs. We got the Islamic University of Minnesota. What are the Muslims doing with regards to going to those scholars that teach there? Say, look, Sheikh, you know, y'all need to come up with some fatwa in conjunction with other scholars in America and compile fatwa on our survival here in America, in economics, in politics, race relations, interpersonal relations between Muslims, interpersonal relations with non-Muslims, right? We have to go to the Islamic University of Minnesota and have them research things like this, right? And if they don't have the capacity to do the type of research that psychologists and sociologists and the likes can do, then you team up. You team up with those professionals that have those research skills that you need, and you bring the Islamic knowledge to the research. Now, here's the kicker though. You don't submit the Islamic knowledge to the research. You submit the research to Islam. This is where we need to stand. And this is how we need to treat information like some of these books that I got behind me. You have to submit this stuff to Islam. There's some things that you're going to find in some of these books that you see behind me that go against Islam. You're going to see some things. However, and I done read them all, the majority, with the exception of maybe a few, and it's a small few, but the majority of the things that are said in these books behind me coincide with Islam. like this book right here, what I'm reading, and I'm expounding on it. The psychology of self-hate and self-defeat, right? So we have to do the same thing. We have to pour money into what? The Islamic universities that we develop here, the Islamic institutes that we develop here. And it has to benefit the Muslims. Now, here's the key, though. The research shouldn't just benefit the survival of the Arabs, the Africans, and the Indo-Pacs, right? No, it should be the survival of all Muslims. And every Muslim should play a role in what? The survival of the Muslims here in the United States of America. We shouldn't just, we're going to just utilize our Indo-Pac brothers. Why? Because a lot of them have engineering and scientific degrees. So we're going to just overlook the African Americans that got, African American Muslims that got scientific degrees. Because the majority of our brothers from the Indo-Pac community got scientific degrees. No. Islam, in Islam, it's not permissible. We already know this. Islam is all inclusive. Although we don't act inclusive, but the reality is Islam is inclusive. This is a reality. So likewise, whatever universities or institutes that we have in America, we got to say, hey, man, we got to put our money together and say, hey, we need you to research this, bro. We need you to figure out which madhab is best to follow in this situation. If the Hanefi madhab is better for this particular situation, then we need to extract everything from the Hanefi fiqh with regards to that issue. Since that particular aspect of what we need comes from Hanefi fiqh. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Are we utilizing our scholars the way these kuffar are utilizing their scholars? It's the point I'm making. It's the point I'm making. And of course we know the answer is no, because Sheikh Yusuf Rios comes on about every day. He does a live about every day on the stuff that we should be doing and the stuff we not getting right. Comes on every day. If the people would just listen to him, of course they look at him as a troublemaker. But the reality is, though, is that they bringing a lot of points. You know, so likewise, with regards to the African Americans and the African American Muslims, in general with the African Americans, you know, talking about the African American, we have to support what? African American causes and what? African American Muslim causes. Why? Because in both societies, for the most part, we're not a part of them. On the Muslim side, nor the non-Muslim side. We're not a part of them. Not like that. For real, not like that. So, you know, this is an issue that we have to deal with. It's an issue we have to deal with. Do we start our own institutes? But if an Arab wants to join, do we do how other people do? No, you can't do that. You still have to practice the deen. You still have to practice the deen and you still have to be inclusive. But at the same time, ain't nothing wrong with pointing out, hey, you need to holler at your people over there and let them know they're not inclusive, right? And then inshallah, you know, Allah is the controller of the hearts. You know, maybe Allah will allow a change then. But moving on. So, after he says that you must have your own institutes, right? And the finances need to be under your control, right? To look out for your people's interests. He says, otherwise, the curing of your sicknesses, the feeding of your people, and all of the other problems will only be coincidental to what the white man is doing for himself, or not dealt with at all. If it's not important to the white man or if he can exploit you in some sort of way, right? These things in relationship to us have a relatively low priority. We have some of the most asinine people around nowadays, right? Now he's about to talk about a particular African Americans that got a certain mindset. You know what I'm saying? People like Candace Owens and your likes, right? From the far right, right? And I'm not left or right, because historically, I keep saying, I say it time and time again, historically, the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party, none of them really benefited us. They just wanted our votes. That's it. They just wanted our votes. And I mentioned this in a talk I gave previously, so you can check that out. The left and right debate. That's what the name of it is. So anyway, he says these things in relationship to us have a relatively low priority. No, I'm sorry. I skipped something. After he said it was asinine, I apologize. This is the part he getting at right here. He says, we have some of the most asinine people around nowadays. Is the black college any longer necessary? This is what some people asked in the 90s. I remember hearing this too. You hear people talk about it now. Why we got black colleges? I had this debate with a brother on Facebook. Why they're African American colleges? The African American colleges exist because, for the most part, African Americans couldn't go to white universities. That's why the HBCUs came into existence. This is why Booker T. Washington created the Tuskegee Institute. Why? Because African Americans had nowhere to be educated. With the exception of 1, 2, 3 here and there. This is why he got the likes of Dr. George Washington Carver with the Tuskegee Institute, right? And he lived on the grounds there, right? So it was out of necessity. But now, because white folks let us go to their schools now, right? And some of our most talented athletes, right? And check this out. Some of our most talented athletes, right? They don't go to HBCUs no more, right? Nah, they don't. HBCU for what? No, not when I got a free ride to UCLA. UNC Chapel Hill, which is around the corner from me. Yeah, I live in Durham, but I'm like Chapel Hill is like right there for me also. Right? I can go to Duke, right? And the likelihood of me going to these schools, me going pro, is higher as opposed to going to Grambling or Grambling State or North Carolina Central University or Elizabeth City State University, right? Or Morehouse and the likes. So our black athletes, they go to these European schools, right? They go to European American schools. And then when a social justice issue come up and you want to speak out, they tell you to shut up and dribble, right? Tell you to shut up and dribble. So, again, that's something that these young guys, they're going to have to make up their mind. Am I for myself or am I for the cause? I'm ranked number 1 in my state in football. I can go anywhere. Alabama want me. Huh? Florida wants me. Florida State wants me. But I'm going to Grambling. This is the issue. Right? I'm taking my talent to the HBCU. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. And you getting the education. But, those other universities, they got a lot of money, right? And they should. Many of them were built off slavery. They should. So anyway, you have black people saying, is the black college any longer necessary? Now that we have been admitted to the white schools, that's what Dr. Amos Wilson is saying. Now that we have been admitted to the white schools, he says, silly. You don't hear them asking, is the Catholic college any longer necessary? Right? Is the Jewish college any longer necessary? He's saying Negroes, right? That ask this question. They don't ask about the Jewish college. They don't ask about the Mormon college. He don't mention Mormon. I'm mentioning the Mormons. 2 Mormon colleges that come to my mind, both in Texas, right? A lot of African Americans go to them. Brigham Young and Rice, right? These are Mormon universities, Mormon college. So even the Mormons, and people, even the Mormons recognize the importance of a college and a university, right? And the money that they're pouring into these universities, right? The alumni and this, that, and the third, right? So again, the point in reading this is to basically show the importance of education, knowledge, and power. Because knowledge brings power, right? Knowledge brings power. No. So he says, no, only the black college. This is because the white man knows the nature and function of a college. And he's afraid that you're going to find out what it is. So he's hurrying now to destroy what little colleges we have and take over their influence, right? Throttle them and or kill them quickly, right? Because, a lot of HBCUs are gone now. I know we had one in Raleigh. I forget the name of it. Gone. It don't even exist no more. Like, it's a lot of them like that. But at any rate, what happens is, and to go off further on what he's saying, that a lot of these universities, what happens is you have these Europeans will come in and they'll donate a lot of money for research, right? But the question needs to be asked, okay, and this research benefits African Americans how? Right? This benefits us how? See, one of the things we have to understand as African American Muslims, and that is that education, politics, right, and power go hand in hand here in America. They go hand in hand. There's no beating around the bush with regards to that. Any Islamic university that you decide to establish, it has to be multi-pronged. It has to be for the advancement of all Muslims, right? And the preservation of all Muslims, right? That's what it has to be. Like I said before, it can't just be for the Arabs or the Indo-Pacs or for the higher echelon amongst the Muslims. It's another problem we have in today. I'm not going to get into it. Just look at a lot of the videos by Sheikh Yusuf Rios. He talks about this stuff all the time, right? The professionals running the show, right? So much so that they put themselves above who? Our American Mashaykh. This is a problem we have. They put themselves above our American Mashaykh. Right? The same one you hired to be the imam, you treat them any kind of way. Right? So, again, that dynamic needs to be looked into. We have to put money into that research. Right? We have to. Matter of fact, African American Muslims need to put money into research with African American professionals on the anti-blackness that we receive at the hands of our brothers and sisters come from the Muslim lands. You understand me? But that, that's another issue, putting your money together. That's a whole nother issue, putting your money together, right? This is something that we have to work on. I take the position, right? I take the position. I'm talking about Haneef. I take the position that as far as the African American Muslims are concerned, right? If we want to better our condition, then we have to first, after seeking help from Allah by waking up in the middle of the night, right? By, calling on Allah after Fajr, right? Doing extra worship, right? A lot of times, when you oppress, you do extra worship, right? As Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to get it in, right? Used to get it in. A lot of worship, right? Extra prayers, right? To get closer to Allah, right? So that what? Allah can make things easier for you. But after doing that, then we need to have what? Cognitive reformation, I call it. Cognitive reformation, meaning we need to start rethinking cognitively, right? Change our thinking on what it means to be a Muslim as an African American. And I get it. Yeah, we Muslim. Somebody gonna say, but Akhi, we Muslim first. As if this dark skin don't exist, right? As if anti-blackness don't exist, right? Amongst the Muslims, right? So I'm supposed to forget all that, right? Nah, man, I'm not forgetting all that. You can cancel that. Nah. What we're gonna do, what I'm saying is, I'm gonna rethink. What like-minded African-American Muslim wants to come together? And then once we come together, where your head at? Here's where mine's at. Then once we form some camaraderie, then what? We need to start looking out for our future. Our what? Looking out for our what? Our survival. That's simple. The same reason why universities are utilized, we need to think on those terms. Why did you get the education that you got? So you can get a job? That's it? Nah. It's a faulty way of thinking. The African American is already at a disadvantage when he goes to the university. I'm going to take these classes so I can get a job. European already above you because when he's sitting in class, I'm going to keep the system going. And you learn the same thing in class. This is what Dr. Amos talks about. You're learning the same thing in class, but your mindset not the same. Cognitively, you're different. Oh man, I get these degrees, man. I make this amount of money if I do. Nah. But the Europeans, we're gonna maintain this. Look, why do you guys think nothing hardly gets done when African Americans hoot and holler in the street? Why nothing ever gets done? It's simple. You don't have any power. We got a lot of education. But from that education, it's supposed to come power. You don't have it. And the power you do have is an illusion. It's an illusion. And the proof of that is, look at what happens when other people come to the United States. Look what happens, right? Hamtramck, Michigan, right? Those of you who don't know Hamtramck, Michigan, right? There's a very beneficial book. I don't know if any of you guys read it, called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, right? The Color of Law. And what he does in this book, he talks about the housing market, right? FHA. He talks about redlining. He also talks about blockbusting. And he also talks about what they call de jure segregation, right? Well, Hamtramck, Michigan, right? We talk about that place now. We say, yo, man, hey, the Arabs got that on lock. Not just the Arabs, in particular the Yemenis. They got that on lock. But you guys, if you study the history of that place, they didn't allow African Americans to come there, right? They didn't allow African Americans to come there, which made it easier for who? The Arabs to come and take it over. They came and took it over because who was there? The Polish. The Polish were there, so it was easy for them to take it over. Because why? The African Americans weren't allowed, right? Not that they didn't have the money. No. You couldn't live in certain areas. You had to be delegated to other areas. This was the reality. So, with that, we find what today? The Arabs run the show in that particular city. That's how they were able to do it. Due to blockbusting, redlining, and de jure segregation in that particular city. And not just that city, but I'm just throwing that out there as an example, right? And a lot of the African Americans, they go to these universities, not keeping in mind the reality of these universities. The university is there not just to educate. I can't reiterate this enough. The university is there to maintain what? Self-preservation and advancement for that society. And due to the fact that we are never hardly considered in this society, then we need to start taking that education and advancing our own people. That's how we become powerful, right? This is how we gain power. Through taking the education and utilizing it for the advancement and the preservation of your own people. And it's no different with regards to the African American Muslim. It's no different. It's no different. You have to do the same thing. Allah allowed you to come to Islam, right? Allah allowed you to come to Islam. So we come to Islam and we don't even want to study. We don't try to learn Arabic. We do bare minimum, right? And so then we're real stupid when it comes to the Quran, right? We're stupid. Like we can't recite it. You know, you can't if somebody asks you, okay, where in the Quran is Surah A'la, what Jews? Things of this nature, right? Or just looking at the Mus'haf, can you open up the Surah Ankabut? You might if you're very familiar with the Quran, you can just put your hand and just open it. Even if you're not right at Surah Ankabut, you kind of close. This is a familiarization with the Book of Allah, right? We don't do this. So therefore, if you're not familiar on that level, guess what? When you do read it, you're not even going to be able to see yourself when you read it. You understand what I'm saying? You're not going to be able to look out into the society and be able to say, Allah talks about this in the story of such and such. For example, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. This one of the things many things I learned from Sheikh Abu Toba, from my tadabbur, right? From sitting with Sheikh Abu Toba, right? My tadabbur, right, is when I read the story of Musa, right? And Colin, he talks about this quite a bit. But one aspect that many people don't talk about, and I'm going to do some talks on this, is this book I'm going over, The Psychology of Self-Hatred, Self-Defeat. You find this in the Quran also. Self-hatred, self-defeat. And I'm just going to refer you. But for example, Musa alayhi salam, he has a cousin by the name of Qarun. Qarun was from the people of Musa, right? This is what Allah says. Verily, Qarun was from the people of Musa. That's what Allah said, right? Qarun was from Bani Israel, right? So for me, every time I read about the guy who slipped the barbiturate in Fred Hampton's drink, right? Or all those black spies that the FBI hired, right? I think about Qarun in the Quran, right? All skin folk and kinfolk, the old saying. So I think of Qarun. Why? Because Qarun was from what? He was from who? He was from Bani Israel. Yes. He was from Bani Israel. Qarun. Then to add insult to injury, Qarun played a role in what? The genocide of his own people. Just go back and look at, because I'm going to do talks on this, but just go back and look at the story, right? He was part of Pharaoh's government. He was part of the government. He was in that government with Haman, Pharaoh, and who? Qarun. Allah makes it clear. He was part of it. He was part of the genocide of Bani Israel. And what do we have? We have African Americans who do what? Participate in the slaughtering of their own people. Why? Based off self-hatred. Right? Self-hatred. It causes you to do that. Another thing that self-hatred does is, because you feel worthless in body, you begin to adorn yourself with expensive things that have no value. You spend a lot of money on Jordans. You buy 12 chains, and one chain may be worth 10,000, right? With diamonds, and you put a lot of gold or platinum or jewelry in your teeth. One ignoramus had a jewel. I don't know these rappers today. I'm Generation X, man. The rap music we listened to back in the day, it was uplifting. I don't know these people. I heard this guy, I don't know who he is, had a diamond or some expensive stone like embedded in his forehead, right? To make himself what? Feel what? Like he's somebody, right? Because why? You have no self-worth, right? You have no self-worth. So therefore you do what? You buy expensive things. You show off. And what did Qarun do? He put on his finest clothes, right? And strutted amongst Bani Israel. Now some of Bani Israel were like, man, if we had what Qarun had. But some of them had to check Qarun, right? Hey, don't be of those who, be bragging or exalt. Don't do that. Someone had to check them. So you find all these qualities. The point I'm mentioning is, and bringing all this is, you find all these qualities of self-hatred, right? Inferiority complex, and then a superiority complex in Qarun. You find it all in Qarun. So this is what I want to present with regards to education, power, right? Education and power, right? Education, knowledge, and power, according to Dr. Amos Wilson, right? This is what I want to present to let everyone know that this is extremely important, that you acquire knowledge, and that knowledge has to be for the betterment, not only of you as an individual, but the people around you, your people, and then the overall people. And in our case, African American Muslims, it has to benefit the Muslims at large, but you also got to focus on who you come from, right? Who you are, So these are things that I want to present. And if anything that is incorrect and evil, inaccurate, no doubt it comes from me and the shaitan. Make no mistake about that one. But anything else that was good, no doubt it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, next time I come on Black American Muslim Opinion, I'll be delving into being comfortable, according to Neely Fuller Jr., right? Because a lot of us have become comfortable. So inshallah, I'll try to do another live on that tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. So with that being said, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.